Okay, we're going to be working on this section of the carving today, and that's the back hind quarters where the tail is and where the udder and the teat comes out. Got to get that leg fit in. In order to start that section, we got to make the bottom of the three or the four legs match. So on the one that I haven't carved, you can see the difference in size. See how out of proportion, where are we? That is in comparison to this one here. So it's much bigger, so I've got to make that the same size as that. And don't worry about what's going on top. Just design it from the bottom and then carve it straight up and down so that the shape is established, and then we'll work that in to the top part. So there it is, drawn on. Ignore the outside marks, and we're going to just try and get those inside marks cut. We'll cut them straight up and down once again. Stop it for there. So now you can see that I've got this foot, this hoof, cut in. This one over here has not been touched, so you can see the difference, radically different. So that one there is close to the shape of the two front ones up here. So we're going to work our way up. So it's straight up and down. So if I was to turn that, you can see that it's straight up and down. And I've left the teat here, and the one that's sticking out the back is still intact. That one there. Just worked on just the foot all the way around. What we have to do is have to establish the foot, and by doing that we relieve the material underneath the teat and the udder, and that allows us to work that in at a later date. So we get the foot shaped in, and then come up and establish the back of the leg, or the outside of the leg. That hip has to be set up, and then all of that material around here, around the teat, is removed, and that makes it stick out. So we'll leave it like that for now. Alright, so the same as what we did on the front. The first thing we did on the front was we turned up the toe. So we're going to do the same on the back. We're going to turn up his toe, and then we're going to start rounding in on the top. And I'll use a gouge on that, a number 8 or a number 9 gouge to round it in. But first of all, turn up that toe, otherwise you'll forget to turn up the toe. So turn up the toe, then start working on the top part of it. Again, leave this flat spot around and then turn it up from there. It goes in quite thin. So I've started the shaping of that foot. You'll notice that the front foot and the back foot now are pretty much the same on the, not quite up to the I don't know what you call it, the shin, or the bottom part of his leg. And we got to get the joint, which is to be up further, established shortly. But get that foot and it rounded around, and that goes all the way around. And looks like I can go in a little bit thinner on the ankle there, down at the bottom. Well, that's the shape I'm looking for. And give it that slipper effect, that elf turn-up toe type idea. It's just roughed out. We'll have to give it the final shape in a little bit. But you can see how that now has relieved this whole sack in here. so we can establish the teat and the udder. Okay. So if you remember, we have already taken these hips in so that they kind of line up with the top. Remember, we established the top up here, and then we cut in the sides down both sides of the hip. So now we have to draw on the leg, and so there's my attempt to draw on the leg. So you notice I made a round circle where the joint is, and then we're going to come down thinner at the bottom. It's got a slight curve both ways in, and then it's the opposite curve coming up to establish the top part of the leg, that hip that goes in. So we got to establish all that and yet still leave all this udder and teat material sitting there. So we're just going to outline that with a V-tool or with a series of gouges just to make sure that stands out. So you're going to end up with something that looks like that. Give you kind of an idea where we're going there. So by outlining it all the way around, then you relieve the udder in that area there. So just go ahead and mark it on, and then if you're happy with your markings, go ahead and start relieving around the outside. So there it is, kind of relieved all the way around the outside. I've left the marks on. Kind of shabby looking the way it is right now, but we'll get to it in a minute. What I'm going to do is now I'm going to carve off the ink marks, leave the round section there, but carve off the ink marks, and then I'll mark up the back side of it, because it's got to have some sweeps in it in order to make that elbow stand out, or that joint stand out. Okay. So as you can see, I've left the knuckle joint sitting there, and then I went around to the back and tried to visualize how the hip would have to come up. Well, in order to leave the knuckle, you have to take a little bit of material above and a little bit of material below. The one above is more or less a straight line. The one below has got to be a curvature, because it's got to come from the knuckle into the foot down at the bottom. Likewise with the other side in here. I think we could have drawn that in better at the bottom here. Now can I do that? Yeah, something like that. Just to give you a handle as to how that should go. So we're just going for a shape. Don't make it too thin. We can always thin it down. We're only making it two-sided, flat in one side, flat in the other side, so that we create the general shape. This udder will have to come around eventually and tie into this leg here. So this leg will, although this is the outside shape here, as it goes back in, it'll get thicker and then join in with the udder. Okay, so remember what we did on the other side. We got it more or less established, and we got the udder pushed back. On the other side now we got to do the same thing here, but it's complicated because we got a tail in the way. But we still have to get away back into the belly, underneath the tail. So we got to get way back in, underneath the tail. And so we got to shape this udder back in. Now the teat will have to stay sticking out, but if you work from the teat back and then all the way back into the body, and just leave that, get that angle established all the way back in, then you'll find that you'll be able to get all the way back. But leave the tail as long as you can. Okay, so I'm going to use a gouge backwards. I'll use this is 12 millimeter number 3 that I'm going to use, and I'll just start pushing it back this way in until I get it established up to the side of the body. So there it is, just roughed out, and you'll notice that I've started with the teat and given it a little bit of a dip in, so that right there, so that I can separate eventually the teat from the udder. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark on where I figure the teat should be, and remove the wood on either side of it. Can you see that? And again, I'm going to just remove it straight down and make it two-dimensional. I'll worry about making it three-dimensional in a bit. So I worked on the other foot while you were away on coffee to try and get it shaped, and working at giving it the shape the other way as well. So there's the two of them, one side, and this is the other side. So we got to kind of work in to get the udder working with it, and over here is the same thing. So you're going to have to go deep into the corner, up in this corner right in here, in order to get that transition between the udder, the belly, and the hip, and the tail. So now I'm going to work on a little bit on the tail. So if you look at it from a top view, you can see that we've got just way too much material in this area here. So I'm going to kind of shape the tail and give it a kind of a lazy S in here, so that the end of the tail, this section hanging down and down here, is going to be like the end of a brush. But above it, as you can see in the diagram, above it is quite thin. So you got to be careful with designing how you want that shape to be, especially when it comes around to the back of his bone here, because it got to end up at the top of the backbone right there. So we'll just mess around with that a little bit. So I have taken out a whack of wood in here and left the flare of the tail at the end, and then I started at the top of the bum here at the backbone, and I started to draw on how I figured that. See how I've got that kind of a lazy S coming down here? And so I drawn on the way I think it should run. And now I'll just take my V-tool and clean that wood out of there and I'll use it. Still leave the tail square, but I want to get that the general shape coming all the way down. So it looks kind of like that. So it's just like a kind of a snake running around the side of his body, tilted up. While I'm at it, I might as well finish off this big knuckle joint at the back here and get it started to shape. And that's just a question of just rounding it off. So what I did was I rounded this top off here, and I used a gouge upside down in order to create that shape. And I've got it all the way up and around. I haven't went down the backbone yet, but I've gotten that knob fixed. So now it works this way, but it won't work in the hollow here. So I picked out another tool to work in there, and so use whatever tool will fit whatever you've got to go into the hollow, so that you can create you had the convex, now you got the concave, and that'll create this knob on the back here, which is his tailbone. And then bring the tail comes all the way around, leave the big flare on the bottom. We can mess around with that later. I haven't rounded that yet, but that would be down the road, and get your leg established and your udder established. But you can see where we're at there now. We're pretty close to the final shape for the udder as well as for that back leg. Just a question of some deep cuts that you can either do with a V-tool or with a knife. I like to use a knife for the final cleanup because it gives it that nice shadow. Okay.